kind of mind-blowing how different countries approach income tax? I mean, really fundamental.
It absolutely is. You've got these huge variations.
Yeah, nations where the government takes a really significant slice, and then others where it's literally nothing, zero. What explains that massive gap?
Well, that stark contrast, it really highlights different philosophies, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Different societal ideas at play.
How so?
It's not just about, collecting revenue. It's deeper. It's about priorities, what a society actually values, and how it thinks resources should be, well, managed and shared out.
Exactly. And that's precisely what we're diving into today. Our mission really is to explore these extremes of global income tax. We want to look at the countries with the absolute highest rates and then those with the lowest or none at all.
And understand why they're so different.
Yes, understand the core principles behind these approaches and, crucially, what the sort of day-to-day reality looks like for people living in these systems. We've looked at a whole range of global tax comparisons to bring you the clearest picture we can.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's kick things off by looking at the countries where income tax hits the highest levels.
Right. So when we look at the nations where people contribute the biggest chunk of their income via taxes, a few names keep popping up.
Okay.
At the very, very top, actually, with a rate hitting 60% for higher earners, is Ivory Coast.
60%. Wow.
Yeah, 60. And this substantial rate is reportedly linked to aims of wealth redistribution within the country.
Okay, 60% is definitely a hefty chunk. And following closely behind, we see a lot of European countries, right?
That's right. A strong European presence. You've got Finland coming in at 56.95%. Then Japan, interestingly, at 55.97%.
Japan too. Okay.
And then Denmark at 55.90%, Austria at 55%, Sweden around 52.3%, Belgium at 50%.
50% still very high.
Oh, yes. The Netherlands is just under that at 49.5%, Slovenia also at 50%, and Portugal at 48%. So it's quite a cluster up there at the top end.
It really is. It's a significant group.
And what's particularly interesting, I think, is the common thread you see among many of these high-tax nations, especially the Nordic ones, like you mentioned, Finland, Denmark, Sweden.
Mm-hmm. The Scandinavian model.
Exactly. They consistently channel a huge percentage of this tax money into really comprehensive welfare states.
Right, so what does that actually look like in practice?
Think about things like universal healthcare systems, education that's either free or heavily subsidized, from primary school right up through university level.
Okay.
And also extensive support for families, parental leave, childcare, that kind of thing.
So while someone living in, say, Finland might see a big slice of their paycheck go to the government, they're also getting a whole suite of public services back that people elsewhere might have to pay for out of pocket. It's almost like a collective investment, isn't it, in societal well-being?
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. And it's really important to stress that these high tax rates don't automatically mean a lower quality of life. Not at all.
Right. That's a common misconception sometimes.
It is. In many of these places, citizens feel a strong sense of social support, of security, and that's a direct result of where the tax money goes.
Oh, okay.
And another key point here in several of these high-tax countries, things called social contributions. Payments for pensions, health care, unemployment insurance.
Yeah, things often separate in other places.
Exactly. They're often sort of bundled into the income tax system, which effectively bumps up the total tax burden an individual actually faces.
Okay. That clarifies things. So it's not just the headline income tax rate, it's the whole package of contributions and then the benefits you get back.
You got it. It's the broader system.
Okay, so we've explored the high end of the scale. Now let's take a sharp turn. Let's look at the complete opposite end, the countries with minimal or even zero personal income tax.
Right. And this is where the map looks totally different.
I bet.
At the absolute bottom, proudly stating a 0% personal income tax rate, we find countries like the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Bahrain.
0%.
Okay, 0. And not far off, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia also have no income tax for individuals living there. Oman currently fits in this category too, although there's been some talk about potential reforms down the line.
Interesting. And it's not just the Middle East, is it?
No, not at all. You also have places like Bermuda, the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, and Monaco. All famous locations, all with a 0% income tax rate.
It's really striking how many of those are either, like you said, in the Gulf region or are well known as major hubs for finance or tourism. Is there a common link there? What connects these low-tax places?
Well, if you look at the bigger picture, many of the Gulf nations like the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, they possess huge natural resource wealth,
Right.
mostly oil and gas.
Right, the oil money.
Exactly. And that allows their governments to fund public spending without needing to tax people's incomes directly. Then the other group, places like the Bahamas, Cayman Islands, Monaco, Bermuda, they often operate as what are called tax havens.
Yeah.
Their economies are really built around attracting international businesses and high net worth individuals. The big draw is offering no or very low taxes. They generate government money in other ways, fees from tourism, regulating financial services, things like that.
So if they're not leaning on income tax, how do these governments actually fund their operations, provide services?
That's the key question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the answer is, well, it varies. Often, people living in these low or no-tax countries do pay other kinds of taxes.
Like VAT.
Exactly. Value-added tax is common, or they might contribute to specific social insurance schemes. It's also worth mentioning that getting residency in some of these places can be pretty tough, quite stringent requirements.
Okay.
And maybe the most significant difference compared to the high-tax welfare states we talked about, these low or no-tax nations generally don't offer that same broad range of publicly funded welfare programs.
What do you mean?
Meaning individuals might find they need to rely much more on private arrangements. Things like private health insurance, saving for their own retirement, paying for private schools for their kids.
Right, so the lack income tax could be balanced out by needing to pay directly for more essential services yourself.
That's often the trade-off, yes.
Okay, that leads us perfectly into doing a more direct comparison. Let's try and put them side by side. Let's take those high-tax welfare states, maybe group Denmark, Finland, Sweden as examples.
Good examples, yeah.
And contrast them directly with some of the no or low tax countries, like, say, the UAE, Qatar, maybe the Bahamas, Cayman Islands, Monaco.
Okay, yeah, that's a really effective way to see the fundamental differences, the trade-offs involved.
So where do we start? Income tax rate itself.
Let's start there. It's the most obvious one. In the high tax group, you're looking at top rates somewhere in the range of, say, 45% up to that 60% we mentioned.
Right.
Compared to a flat 0% in the low tax group we picked. The difference is, well, dramatic.
Absolutely stark. Okay, what about healthcare?
In our high tax examples, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, it's generally a universal system, often free when you use it or heavily subsidized by the state, funded by those taxes.
And the low tax group.
Much more commonly relies on private insurance or paying directly for care, especially for expats.
Okay, education, similar pattern.
Very similar. Free public education, often right through university, is a hallmark of the high-tax Nordic nations. Whereas in the low-tax ones, there's a much greater reliance on private schools, which can be very expensive, particularly for international communities.
What about safety nets, like pensions and unemployment?
Big differences there, too. Pensions in high-tax countries usually involve a state system, plus those Social Security contributions we talked about, a public framework.
Right.
In contrast, for expats, especially in no-tax countries, government pension provision might be minimal, maybe non-existent. It really puts the onus on individuals to save heavily for their own retirement.
A lot more personal responsibility there.
Definitely. And unemployment benefits.
Yeah.
Typically quite generous in welfare states, maybe covering a decent chunk of your previous salary for a period.
And in the no tax places.
Often very limited or simply not available, particularly for non-citizens.
Wow, okay. Let's talk family support. Parental leave, child benefits.
Again, quite different. High-tax countries often boast extensive periods of paid parental leave.
Paid being the key word.
Absolutely. Whereas in the low-tax ones, leave might be unpaid or for much shorter durations, if available at all beyond basic requirements. And those direct child benefit payments, regular allowances for families, common in the Nordic model, much less common or maybe only for citizens in the no-tax group.
Even things like housing support.
Yeah, some level of housing assistance might be available for lower-income people or those out of work in high-tax nations.
Yeah.
That's generally not a feature you'd find in, say, Monaco or the UAE.
Okay. What about just the general cost of living? Is one type always more expensive?
That's an interesting one. The cost of living can actually be high in both types of countries. Think about cities like Copenhagen or Stockholm versus, say, Dubai or Georgetown in the Caymans.
Right, they can both be pricey places.
They can. But the argument is that in the high-tax welfare states, that high cost might be somewhat offset because you're receiving comprehensive social services without extra direct cost.
Ah, okay.
Whereas in many no-tax havens, particularly places like Monaco, Bermuda, Cayman Islands, the cost of living can be exceptionally high without that underlying public safety net to fall back on if things get tough.
That's a crucial distinction. Infrastructure, public transport, roads.
Generally tends to be very well developed and maintained in the high-tax nations, thanks to that consistent public funding. In the no-tax countries, it can vary more depending on the specific place and its priorities.
And finally, just overall quality of life rankings. Where do they typically fall?
Well, you often see the Nordic countries ranking very, very highly on various global quality of life indexes. The rankings within the no-tax group tend to be more varied. Some do well, others less so, depending on what's being measured.
Okay. So if we try to sort of boil it all down,
Yeah.
the core difference really seems to be this fundamental choice, doesn't it?
I think so.
Tax models are essentially prioritizing comprehensive welfare, maybe aiming for lower inequality, and funding it all through those higher taxes.
It's a collective approach.
As the low or no tax models focus more on attracting capital, investment, businesses, individuals maybe, using tax as the big incentive.
Correct.
But that often means individuals end up taking on much more personal responsibility for funding their own essential needs: healthcare, retirement, education.
Exactly. That sums up the core trade-off very well.
Yeah.
And this brings the crucial question back to you, the listener.
Yeah.
What are your personal priorities?
Yeah.
Which model aligns better with what you value most? Is it the security and the broad safety net from extensive public services, even if it means paying more tax?
Right.
Or do you prioritize keeping more of your earned income, having that greater individual financial control, even if it means you're more directly responsible for arranging and paying for things like health cover or saving for retirement?
It really highlights that there's no single best system, is there? It's so subjective. It depends entirely on personal values and also on what a whole society collectively decides it wants to prioritize.
Absolutely. And maybe that leads us to a final thought to leave you with as we wrap up.
Yeah. Okay.
In this world that's becoming more and more interconnected, more globalized, how might this sort of competition, this dynamic between these really different tax models, how might that evolve?
Interesting question.
What could be the long-term consequences for individuals moving around, but also for nations themselves as these systems continue to exist side by side, competing, maybe adapting? It's definitely something worth pondering, those trade-offs and their bigger societal impacts.